join me in prayer? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Like a wide variety of topics I have encountered over the past several months, nursing is not something I ever gave much thought to. When I encountered references like the one we find in our scripture today, with descriptions of Christians longing for spiritual milk, like newborn infants, the language was purely poetic to me. It was uncomplicated. We should be hungry for God. Beautiful metaphor. Next sentence. Well, that is no longer the case. For breastfeeding, it turns out, is less of a lovely, poetic thing that happens and more of some kind of science. One might assume, or at least I always did, that it just occurs. Babies are born, they are hungry, they eat. Turns out, not so much. I know this won't come as a shock to anyone who is already a parent, but Jake and I were very surprised to find that we are expected to attend a class on how to breastfeed. We've also discovered that there is a whole profession of people called lactation consultants who are employed by hospitals and medical professionals. There are specially recommended snacks that one can eat and diets to increase your milk supply. There are even specialty pillows to buy. And even after all that, some children simply never get it. They can't get their little faces in the right position, or they fall asleep immediately and don't get a full feeding, or they're just so curious about the outside world that they're distracted and they look around and they don't quite attach. Our friends who are parents before us have been sharing their tips. One friend said, put a blanket over him so there's nothing to look at. Another said, it's helpful if you blow on her face so that she doesn't pass out while she's eating. Others have just shrugged and told us to make sure that we leave room in our budget to buy the darn formula. Like so much of our journey of preparing for parenthood, the information we are acquiring has reminded me again and again of a truth that is easy to lose. Survival is not something we can do on our own. Compared to most other animals, the human infant comes woefully unprepared. They are defenseless. They can't control their own body temperature. Many of them, it turns out, can't even figure out how to eat correctly. A child who does not have caregivers ready to feed, to wrap, to cajole, and care for them will not survive. We, as a species, are designed from the very first moment of our existence to depend on one another. This is not true for all animals. In fact, it is not true for most, but it is true for us humans. And it does not stop with our births. On this Mothering Sunday, we give thanks for all of the ones who mother us, biological mothers or stepmothers, best friends, teachers, pastors. We remember that God is described as a mother. The Psalms describe her as a mothering hen, clucking over us and sheltering us in the protection of her divine wings. And when God's self came to earth, Christ was raised up not for glory, but for caretaking and for service. Raised up to show us the extent of mercy and love. And we indeed are Christ's chosen people, a people called to follow Christ's example, chosen for service, as all those who mother are. This is why caring for one another is what it meant to be a Christian in the early church. For to join in on that project and in that community was to accept responsibility for those around you, particularly the most vulnerable. To be a Christian meant to share of what one had, whether that was prayers or property, food or encouragement. On this Mothering Sunday, in a time when we are all vulnerable and collectively grieving, perhaps as never before, let us claim this day and this time to remember something so simple that perhaps only infants know it best. We cannot survive alone. We cannot survive without one another. We were never supposed to. Our lives are interdependent and interwoven, and we are our brother's keeper. As we go into the world and about our week this week, we will, I suspect, have many moments that are ripe for remembering our special call as Christians. Perhaps they will come as we drop off diapers or wipes to the church for the youngest in our communities, or as we strap a mask on over our faces. Perhaps it will come as we double back to the car for the hand sanitizer, or, as I did this week, idle a car outside a beckoning, suddenly open baby shop before deciding not to risk those around me by going in. This is a time when we are constantly weighing our needs with the needs of the most vulnerable, our most vulnerable neighbors. It is my prayer that as Christians, we can do this with, at least intermittently, a spirit of pride and a feeling of vocation, or even chosenness. For caring for one another, mothering one another, is an essential part of the project to which we have been called. Our God who watches over us like a mother hen, asks that we follow in the divine example. Let us then join in and mother each other, ourselves, and our world. Happy Mother's Day, and amen.